Washington's headed to the big house for an early kickoff. It's time for some keys to the game.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as all that really does help the channel out a lot. Lars, we got a phenomenal show coming out all our everydayers today, as we love to do on these Fridays in game week. We got our we're going to get super bold this week with our bold predictions, your score prediction. We got our defensive keys to the game, but as always, we start on the offensive side of the ball. And when you look at this matchup, yes, the early kickoff at, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, all that sort of stuff. What is the number one key to the game for this Husky team?
You have to score in the first quarter. And I don't mean just two drives that result in field goals. You have to find a touchdown, honestly, in the first quarter. It should be at least 7, get 7, but ideally get 2 scoring possessions in the first quarter, because you look at the numbers. Ironically, UW somehow, some way is still outscoring their opponents in the first quarter, 35-30. But in the Big Ten, it's 11-33 in favor of the opponent. And I think that, to me, is going to be a problem. If you don't score in the first quarter and you're able to let Michigan hang around, that could kind of go sideways in a hurry. And so for me, whether it's Jonah on the ground, Dezmen through the air, you have enough pieces to make it work, but you have to score early against Michigan.
So I love where you're going with that. I disagree with one thing. I think that 2 field goals, you are happy with that, because all of a sudden, it's a 1-score game. It is what it is. But it's exactly what you're saying. You're still scoring and putting points on the board and showing that you can overcome these slow starts and figure out a way to make something happen early in the game. But the one thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about early is something that somebody you just mentioned. That's Jonah Coleman. Because if we look at Jonah's last 4 games since the end of the UC Davis game, he has not had more than 70 rushing yards in a contest. He had 100 yards receiving against Washington State, which is awesome. And it's not that Jonah has been bad. I don't want to get anything twisted with that. But it's very clear, and if you talk to any of the coaching staff, any of the players, they've mentioned that after several games, that they understand that the number one key that opposing defenses are coming into this game with, it's stopping Jonah Coleman. You need to find a way to get him going, whether that's calling some different plays to try to, get him involved in the screen game early on. I don't care if it's on the ground, to be completely honest with you. It's just finding ways to have arguably your best skill player make an impact on this game, because we know this Michigan defensive line is really solid. We know that their front 7 has been solid defending the run. They're 6th in the conference right now, allowing just a little bit over 100 yards per game on the ground. And in a game like this, and in several games that we've seen so far this season in Big Ten play, he has, again, been the focal point of opposing defensive strategies. So if they are going to crowd the box and, you can't really get him going early on in the contest, but all of a sudden that's going to open stuff up for Dezmen later on in the read option game. Something Jimmy Doherty talked about on Tuesday, but it all just works a little bit better if you can find a way to establish Jonah Coleman in this ball game.
I completely agree. And how do you do that? You have to protect Dezmen, and you have to win the line of scrimmage. I think that when you get to the offensive line, that's kind of what we're talking about here. Pocky P now, if he happens to, when he gets another star, you look at Max McCree, possibly at left tackle, having to, go for his, I think, second start in a row, third start in a row at this point. Third, yeah. And, Max has been doing a job, but this is an opportunity for him to, arrive, I guess, shall we say, if Carver's not able to go. I think you look at where Washington's vulnerable along the offensive line, it's been on the left side. And that's not to say John Mills has been bad. When he was in there, when Carver was in there, it was great. But there is a drop-off. And I think we've started to see that over the past couple of games. And, for me, it gets down to you have to either one, whether you're establishing the run with Jonah Coleman or you're, using a screen game or whatever, you have to give Dezmen some time. I mean, he's a magician. I said that on a show earlier this week. But the only way a magician works is if he's able to have time to cook. You got the magician, it doesn't instantly happen. You got to work up to the magic trick. So when you're talking about getting the offense going and all of this, we need to see an improved offensive line play, however you want to characterize it. It's just, UW has to prove that they're as physical, if not more physical than Michigan. I think there's potential for that. We've seen that with Jurez Party. His growth this season has been phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Jaron Hatchett's done a good job, and obviously Landon Hatchett probably is going to get some Big Ten awards at the end of the season. But it's got to happen across all 5 positions.
So I agree with you there, where I look at this line, and yeah, you mentioned it with Maximus McCree and Pocky Finau probably going to wind up playing in this game. It doesn't, I feel a little more optimistic on Carver Willis than I do on John Mills at this point in time. It still doesn't feel like they're fully ready to return. So that's something I want to monitor as we, lead up to the game. As the ever dares to listen to this, it's probably somewhere in the ballpark of 24 hours remaining until kickoff. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like, because this is something that Washington has gotten a lot better along the offensive line this year. You nailed it. They, on Thursday, were named to the midseason honor roll for the Joe Moore Award, which is awesome, because just thinking about where this offensive line was 18 months ago, we saw them practicing with trash cans and not knowing who, I think it was 3 starters, were going to wind up being from that group, was absolutely insane. So the turnaround on that group has been tremendous. And this is going to be just as big of a test as Ohio State. I don't think Michigan's defensive line is as talented as Ohio State's is right now, but I think they still have as many pieces. And this is one of the better units you are going to see in that department this season. So you need to find a way to not only keep the pocket clean, but again, when it comes back to establishing Jonah Coleman, you need to find a way to win the battle in the trenches, because to go back to what you're talking about earlier with scoring fast, because I still think that is probably the number one thing that Washington needs to find a way to do. This Michigan team, with or without Justice Haynes, who we'll talk about in a little bit, this Michigan team is designed to play from ahead and just kind of slowly squeeze the life out of you like a snake, because that's just the way they've operated this season. Like, you go look at the passing, they're second fewest in passing attempts this season. Like, Bryce Underwood has not been asked to do a whole lot. And the way to combat that is by playing from ahead and forcing a true freshman quarterback to make plays with his arm, which again, he has not been asked to do this season, which I've been talking about on the show all week. And so when I look at what Washington can do, it's the ability to make plays down the field, like explosive plays with guys like Denzel Boston, Dezmen, Roebuck. I think this secondary is solid for Michigan, but I don't think it's what it has been in past years. And I think that there are going to be several advantages on the back end to take advantage, whether it is, Denzel Boston, some of these one-on-one opportunities that he might see, whether it's Dezmen, Roebuck, and Raiden Vinesbright, who've continued to break out, Chris Lawson, Omari Evans, who have been really solid pieces in the rotation this season, or somebody like Decker DeGraff, somebody out of the backfield, Jonah Coleman, Adam Muhammad, whoever it is. Washington has so many weapons, and this is without mentioning, which we did very briefly earlier, what DeMond Williams can do outside of the pocket with his legs, that I think Washington is going to have the ability to put up points this season, but none of that, to bring it back to your point here, is going to matter if you can't give DeMond a little bit of time.
And with perfect to say time, stay on schedule. I think that's another thing, where don't put yourself in 3rd and +7, 3rd and +6, where we've seen that, you can execute on 3rd down on offense, but you go through the numbers, anytime it's beyond 7, the hit rate is next to none. It's almost insane. Whether that's penalties that go from a 3rd and 4 to a 3rd and 9, or whether it's just a sack on this.
Yeah.
And I think those kind of work in tandem together, where penalties have to be another thing to go away this weekend. You cannot have anywhere near 9 penalties like you had against Rutgers. You can get away with that against Rutgers this season, potentially. You can't at the Big House against Michigan. And so for me, it's stay on schedule. That includes penalties, but also get DeMond in rhythm, kind of just get make it a simple enough game plan to where you can stay on schedule, but not too simple to where you become predictable.
Discipline, that works on both sides of the ball. With that being said, let's jump over to the defense. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Washington, DeMond Williams Jr. delivered in a big way. I don't even need to list all the awards here. Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week, Davey O'Brien, Co-National Quarterback of the Week, Maxwell Award Player of the Week with 402 yards passing and 136 yards rushing. When the pressure was on, he came through through, no hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching week after week, this performance wasn't a fluke. Dezmen is on a streak. And just like Dezmen delivered for the Huskies, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday, keep the streak alive, fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply, promo period through November 18th. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punching projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? Supply House has next day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Join the free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. When I look at the defensive side of the ball, it's very clear. With or without Justice Haynes in this game, Washington's number one priority needs to be to stop the run. And to Washington's credit, this has been an elite run defense so far this season. They're 7th in the country, allowing 82.8 yards per game against the run. So this matchup, I'm really excited about it. I have a bold prediction about that. So that's just a little hint to make sure you stay tuned for later on. But I look at this game, and again, Justice Haynes, with or without him, Michigan is going to want to run the ball early and often. And, we don't need to go into all the mess that is the Jacob Manu situation, the mess being strictly created by the NCAA, by the way. I've got to make sure that I add that in there. But I think this is a game that he's going to play in, which is going to be a lot of fun because he brings such a major boost to Washington's run defense, and having a guy like that who can attack downhill and just free up blocks, if it's somebody like Alex McLaughlin who's playing next to him in that hybrid safety linebacker role, sort of just in the box, or if it is Devin Bryant, whoever else it might be, X-Ray Alexander being another guy who's really come along this season, been tremendous against the run. This is the number one thing. It's Michigan is averaging 5.98 yards per carry this season. They're 3rd in the Big Ten in rushing offense. They've done a tremendous job moving the ball on the ground this year. But as we saw last week against USC, when they get down and asking Bryce Underwood to make plays, he still is a tremendous talent with really nice arm strength, the mobility to get outside the pocket. But it's clear that it's not all the way there yet. That's okay. He's an 18-year-old true freshman. But if Washington can stop the run, I really like their chances in this contest.
This is a game, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but this is where we find out, is it talent or is it scheme? Where, because, to your point, they have one of the better run defenses, but does that mean it's because they're as good as the number one team should be, or because they're so, protecting everything and keep everything in front of you, where, you look at Kelly McManus from Rutgers, he was check down city in a way where he got 18, 19 completions in the first half, maybe more. It felt like just everything was kind of open underneath for him, where you're not going to get beat deep, but at the same time, you're almost death by 1,000 cuts. And I think for Washington, you can't allow that on some level, especially later on in the game. I think, Michigan's going to do what they can to, get a, touchdown or two early. But I think this defense is built to where they can bend but not break in that respect. And so I agree about that. But I think for me, it starts on 3rd down. You have to find a way to get off the field. Because I don't disagree about the run. You're going to get your yardage there. You're going to get your production from Michigan's running backs, but don't let it be detrimental to where you stay on the field, where if you're able to get, Michigan eats up 4 or 5 minutes of clock, but then you force a punt around the, midfield line, or whether, you find some way to kind of get off the field some way, somehow, that's where it's going to be. And part of that comes from pressuring Bryce Underwood if you shut down the run. Some of it's just going to come from taking advantage of Michigan's miscues. And I think that was kind of both factor into UW needing to continue that strength that they had on 3rd down, which they haven't necessarily consistently had for 4 quarters, but they've had it when it mattered most.
So I hear what you're saying. And the one thing that I want to talk about when it comes to 3rd downs, because I think you bring up a good point there, is the 3rd and longs have been a lot more frustrating than 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3 this year because of, what you're talking about with some of these just throws underneath and where the holes in just some of these zones are. And a lot of that is because we've seen some inexperienced defenders over the middle of the field, whether it be Leroy Bryant or Rashawn Clark in the nickel, plus Ryland Dillard Allen on a couple of those those throws where it kind of sat down between those two guys. I'm thinking of a couple different plays on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9 from that game last week against Rutgers. It sat down right at the sticks, and just neither guy was able to trigger fast enough to get to where the ball needed to, or just to get to where the ball was. So I look at just that regard, and it's one of those things where I talked about this a little bit earlier this week. I look at the back end of this defense, and I like the way that Washington matches up on the outside with Donovan McClellan and Andrew Marsh, where, I know Husky fans know what Andrew Marsh is, just was as a recruit full well, because we talked about a lot here on the show. I think that Washington is going to have an advantage because unlike these Rutgers receivers, unlike the Ohio State receivers we saw a couple of weeks ago, and even Maryland to an extent, they're just not asked to do nearly as much, and they've made plays. I'm not trying to say that they're not good players by any stretch of the imagination, but I love what Washington brings on the outside at corner when they're fully healthy. And I feel like Ryan Walters, now that Tacario Davis is getting back to full strength, and Ephesians Prysock has quietly been a really, really solid defender for the Huskies on the other side of the field this year, with or without Tacario on the field. I just like what Washington has at both of those spots. And in 3rd and 7 and 3rd and 8, it's not so much that I'm worried about what's going on there. I'm curious to see how things might change over the middle of the field a little bit, but it goes back to something else where if you are able to shut down the run, it's getting after Bryce Underwood and getting pressure on him and not letting him sit back and roll out of the pocket and try to make a play with his legs or anything like that. There are so many different things that this defense has been solid at this year, but there are just as many where this really needs to improve. That really needs to improve. And we saw 3 sacks last week against Rutgers, and I thought that was great. You did a good job getting after, I think, Kaliakmanis against a poor offensive line, because Rutgers has allowed the 2nd most sacks in the conference this season. You're not seeing that in Michigan, so you need to find ways to get pressure and speed Bryce Underwood up and make him process the game a lot faster, which is where these corners especially are going to really thrive.
I'm glad you make that point, because I don't disagree. I just think it kind of ties in a way with what I said in the first segment, which is when you get that pressure on Bryce, do not shoot yourself in the foot. I
Absolutely.
know Jedd said after the end, where I'm getting with this is don't be unnecessarily physical, especially when you look at Michigan's receivers. Andrew Marsh, great. Some of those guys are solid receivers, but I'm picking Washington's cornerbacks every day and twice on Sunday in those matchups, whichever one you want to pick. Tacario and Ephesians need to make sure you don't give the reps an out to where we saw against Rutgers. You have a couple of iffy DPIs or iffy holding call where that's another.
One of them was straight up terrible. I got to throw that out there. That one on Prysock was straight up terrible.
Exactly. And that's why, and again, we don't blame you for that at all. And much like Jedd said after the game when I asked him, he's like, look, we're going to be physical on the outside. So you're going to have some of those. But it's when they've come or kind of what's resulted from them. And you especially look at the Maryland game as well in that regard. Do not put yourself behind the sticks on defense even more so than you might, depending on how this game goes for Michigan offensively. Because I do like the quarterbacks outside. I do like what Tacario brings. And Ephesians getting his first pick since 2023 is awesome. But, we need to see a little bit more of that, especially in these bigger games. Like you show you can do it against the Wazoos of the world and the Marylands and the Rutgers. It's no shot at either of those programs. But Michigan is a level up from both of those programs. And I think it's just a matter of making sure you play discipline within your technique to where Jacob Lane, or I think Isaiah Ward, this should be his coming out party this year. I mean, we haven't really, talked about him a ton. I think this could be a game where if you're able to scheme him open or Extra Alexander, like you mentioned, somebody on UW's defense that we haven't traditionally seen, explode is going to have a big game this weekend, I feel. And that's just a kind of teaser for next segment. But I think that kind of starts on the defensive side of the ball where we don't really know where that answer is going to come from. It's not going to be Zach Durfee, but somebody else is going to have to find a way to bring that pressure on Bryce if you're able to shut down the run game, which I think they will be. So when you get those opportunities to pressure Bryce, don't let it cost you on the back end with an unnecessary penalty or, don't put yourself in the position where the refs can make a bad call.
So I hear where you're going with that, because I agree. I just want to throw some numbers out there. Washington, and a lot of this is, it is on both sides of the ball. Washington has not been a very disciplined team this season, which is unfortunate. They are 15th in pretty much every single penalty category in the Big Ten this year, which has just been absolutely frustrating. And there are a couple that you can go back and nitpick if you really want to. And this is a bad call, and that's a bad call. And, part of it is certainly not, putting it in a situation where it is in the ref's hands and not your own. But there are so many different little things where I look at this game and I just think, it's probably going to come down to something like that. And I'm not just saying in a penalty standpoint, but I think this is going to be like a 3-point game, to be completely honest with you. And it's one of those things where I don't think a penalty is going to decide this matchup, and it never should. And probably, in 99% of games, I would say that's true. I look at what Washington brings to the table. And the last thing I want to say is, because I think you bring up a great point when it comes to Isaiah Ward, is that's where this game is going to be won and lost, with Washington's defensive line, because it doesn't just come down to stopping the run. It's going to come down to getting after Bryce Underwood. And both of those things, if Washington does one of them effectively, that's fine. I don't think that's going to be enough to win this game, to be honest with you. You need to do both, or I don't want to say things are going to go south, but I think people are going to be nervous, because this game where you're traveling across multiple time zones in Michigan's house, I don't know if it's going to be a sold out crowd. I've seen some things on, Game Time, shout out to them, that maybe this won't be the sold out crowd that Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff have gotten used to on the road, which is kind of weird to say, since I know he said it during a press conference earlier this week. And, going back, I think he's right that every other game that Washington has played on the road this season, or not even just this season, last year as well, has been sold out. So it's one of those things where, just in these hostile environments, it's still, the biggest stadium in college football. There's still going to be a lot just that is already slanted against you in this game, because you're on the road, that you need to make sure that the defensive line in particular shows up. And a lot of that, in my opinion, is going to come down to the rotation on the interior. And I got a bold prediction for that, but we'll get to it on the other side of the break. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Regeat. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Regeat Go Long. This isn't just another ED pill. It's a total game changer for confidence. The effects can last up to 36 hours. That's confidence all day, all night, and even into the next day. The process is simple. Connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online, and if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly right to your door. Ready to level up your confidence in the bedroom? Head to rugiet.com and use promo code LOCKDOWNCollege for 15% off your first order. That's rugiet.com, promo code LOCKDOWNCollege. Make sure to use our code so they know we sent you. We've also got a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me so many ways to play. I built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. So whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats just like I do, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. So Lars, it's time. We love doing these bold predictions every week, and I'm just going to give you the floor for this one.
Ooh, so as much as we just talked about UW's, rush game and kind of finding ways to scheme against a good Michigan defensive line, this is bold predictions for a reason.
Yep,
UW gets three rushing touchdowns in the game from 3 different players. Jonah Coleman adds to his nation-leading 11. I think he has 11 now, right?
12 total. 11 on the ground.
Again, rushing being key. I every time I hear that stat where he has 12, I'm like, wait, am I missing one? When did he get that extra? Oh, no, it's the receiving one. Exactly. Rushing only. Adam Muhammad gets 1, and Damon Williams, obviously, because the magician's going to find 6 at some point here. So you're going to get 3 rushing touchdowns from Washington in this game.
So I like where you're going with that. I took a different approach here, because on last week's show, I'm very proud that all of my demands, I had a whole, I tried to predict demands to whole stat line, nailed 4 total touchdowns, by the way, very proud of myself for that one. And yes, I'm doing all this just so I can pat myself on the back. But I look at Demond in this game, and I think he's going to be the key. I do believe that Michigan, as all of these other teams have done, Jonah Coleman is going to be the plan of attack, and just figure everything out from there. As Demond said after the game, I was going to take everything that Rutgers gave me last week. And so I have Demond Williams in this game throwing for 240 yards. I have him getting 70 on the ground. I think that that's kind of a fair number after going for 136 last week. And I have him having 3 total touchdowns. So I like where you're going with that. I don't think, we're going to combine these numbers by any stretch of the imagination, even this week on a segment where, again, we love to get bold with some of these. Demond has week in and week out proven that he's getting better. in one area of his game or another. And, this week, I'm pretty sure that one of the big emphasis is going to be on ball security and, sliding, not taking extra hits like we saw a couple times last week. So I feel good about Dezmen still taking a significant number of carries. He took 13 last week when Jonah Coleman took 14. So I feel like we're going to see a fair amount of him on the ground. And if Michigan is trying to do a decent amount to stop the read option and stop the ground game, then he's going to go to the air and try to take advantage of some one-on-one matchups on the outside. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like, but I'm just going to hand the floor back over to you because I like where I'm going with this one. And after last week, I don't know. I'm just feeling confident about that.
As you were saying that, I was trying to look at the FanDuel Dezmen, because by the way, shout out FanDuel, plenty of odds in terms of parlays in this game, because when you look at Dezmen's rushing yards, I think it's, you have to get to 60 for plus money. So there you go. Yeah, you're kind of right on the money.
That's fine, but 70.
Exactly. And that's why I was saying good job there, because I think it's going to come down to finding touchdowns. You're going to find points. It's not going to be every drive. I mean, if UW has 8-9 drives in the game, they're scoring on 4 or 5 of them. I put the over under at 4.5. I think if you can find a way to score on every other possession, you are going to win the game. I think that's going to be the key here, where scoring on, consecutive possessions just doesn't really seem plausible in this game. I mean, again, Michigan, for what it's worth, is vulnerable right now. I think that's
Absolutely.
A program, from what we both heard, is, the fan base kind of wants Sherrone out to some extent. They don't really believe in him. And you look at where Michigan is coming out of this game, they got cooked through the air. So I think one guy that doesn't have a receiving touchdown this season that will, Decker DeGraff. The ironic part of Michigan being tight end here, I think that, Decker DeGraff becomes the only tight end in the game to have a touchdown reception. So I think that is going to be a factor as well. And also, I think just in general, he's going to need to have a good game. You mentioned, the blocking aspect of it. Whether you have 2 tight ends as blockers or one breaks out halfway through, I think that, the tight end position really is going to be the X factor in this game on offense.
So I agree with that. I only had one offensive prediction for this week, which is very rare for me because I think this is going to be a defensive battle where you say scoring on 4 or 5 possessions could win you this game. Sure, but what if they're all field goals? It's just something that I wanted to make sure I threw out there because one thing where I like the under in this game. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored. I think this is going to be a really heavy defensive battle. So speaking of unders, Michigan is rushing for about 215 yards a game this season, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. I have them under 110 yards in this contest. Now, a big part of that is playing this game without Justice Haynes. But also, I wanted to give some props to Washington's defense because something we got to talk about with Isaiah Ward and Tacario Davis on Tuesday is these guys are starting to feel really comfortable in this Ryan Walters scheme. And one of the first things that Tacario Davis said when I asked him about playing in this 5 down front and how it just plays to his strength is he said, it's great for defending the run. We love it because we know there are so many bodies along the line of scrimmage and we're just relying on the guys behind us this part is my words. They're just relying on the guys behind him to come down and make plays. And it's why I talked earlier about Jacob Manu potentially playing in this game and what he can bring to the field. And guys like Alex McLaughlin, the team's leader in tackles this season. Devin Bryant, who's been really solid this year. Exree Alexander, again, who has improved in leaps and bounds this year. Zadrius Rainey-Saleh, who played in his first career college game last week against Rutgers. And I was so impressed with what he brought to the table. Washington is really not just starting to get healthy on defense, they're starting to click. There's still a ways to go, especially on the back end in the secondary. But I look at what Washington's run defense is bringing to the table right now, and there's no reason for me to bet against them, even against one of the heaviest run teams in the Big Ten.
I like that a lot. As you're saying that, making me want to go look at rushing. UW's rushing yards allowed per game. They're second in the Big Ten at 82.8. So I would honestly, here's a semi-bold, a real bold actually, take the under on that. I think Michigan finishes with 78 rushing yards. And, given what we did against the Wazoo game, I think we know that bold prediction might actually come true. But with that being said, my last one before we get to the always accurate air quotes score prediction, if you want. Grady Gross, you mentioned it's going to be a kicking, special teams is going to matter in this. Grady redeems himself from the Rutgers game and does not miss. Much like he went into the game against Rutgers 5 for 5, he ends the game with 3 field goals. Maybe one's a game winner, maybe not. Who's to say?
I like where you're going with that, and we'll get to that in just a second with your score prediction. The other one that I want to talk about is like I just said a minute ago, Washington secondary has some work to do, and they really need to find a way to improve on the back end. And part of that is going back to what John Richardson told us all spring and all the fall. Which is turning good plays into great plays, and that's creating turnovers. So this is something where I look at Bryce Underwood's numbers here, and he's thrown 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions this year. Like I've been saying, they're not asking him to do a lot, but if Washington can find a way to get a lead in this game, then he might have to do a little bit more through the air. And I think Tacario Davis, Ephesians Prysock on the outside can create some of those big plays. So I'm getting super bold with this one because Michigan has done a very good job protecting the ball so far this year. I think Washington forces 3 turnovers in this game.
I like that. And you want to go one apiece and EV doubles down?
No, I think someone's going to have their first interception. I couldn't decide on who I wanted to pick, to be honest with you, between Ryland Dillard-Allen and Rashawn Clark. So I'm going to go with that. Maybe Tacario gets one back from what he had last week, or should have had on the, I can't say I fully disagreed with the DPI call, but 2 interceptions and a fumble is where I wanted to go.
I was going to say, Tacario had about 5 dropped interceptions against Rutgers, so you can pick any 2 of the 3. I could see Tacario having 2 and RDA having 1. But with that being said, yeah, there's going to be, take the under.
You said with that being said,
that's on me. That hand up, that's on me. But no, actually, I like that because I did stop myself a little bit there. I do think this is going to be a 3-point game, like you mentioned earlier. I've been going back and forth on, how high does the total actually get, and I'm warming up to your opinion to take the under in this game. And as you mentioned, with minimal scoring in this game, potentially over/under on FanDuel 50.5. Take the under. Washington 23, Michigan 20.
Okay, yep, there we go. 3-point game. I like that. It's certainly I look at this matchup. I like where you're going with that because this is one of the games where if you go back to our preseason record predictions, this is one I had Washington dropping, where this is a big prove-it game for Jedd Fisch. He has done a good job on the road so far this season, where you got off to a fast start against Washington State, which you love to see, but then you didn't against Maryland. And my question is the long flight going to show some effects early on? Because this is a game where, like we said earlier, you cannot find yourself down in this game early on. So let's see how this one plays out. Really excited about it, Lars. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you after the game.